What's going on, guys? We're going to break up the regularly scheduled programming of people bench pressing their furniture and talk a little bit about the lower back. So last month I put up a post basically saying that low back strength really doesn't exist. And that sort of raised a few questions. So I wanted to go into more detail as to why that statement reigns true in our training. So lower back strength, as we move the lower back muscles of the lower back from insertion to origin, kind of yield a very low return when it comes to other potential exercises we could use in stabilizing this otherwise very precarious part of the spine. So, and to talk about low back strength and low back stability, we first need to identify the muscles that we're going to be referring to. So the low back can be broken up, roughly speaking, into these muscles here. So we have the quadratus lumborum, we have a group of muscles called your transversospinalis muscles. Now this incorporates many muscles. The most commonly cited is one called the multifidus. Then moving lateral from that, again, we're looking at the erectors paraspinal muscles, often cited as the extensor muscles of our back, which is going to be the iliocostalis, longissimus, and spinalis. So these muscles are going to be the bulk of what comprises the musculature of the lumbar spine. Now, peripheral to this is going to be our thoracolumbar fascia. Now, this is where the conversation around true strength of the lower back comes in. So this is your bodybuilding Christmas tree, right? Now, the fascia is going to lie on top of the erectors and transversospinalis, but beneath the quadratus lumborum. Taking into consideration as well that coming in from the anterior side is going to be the psoas major as it attaches onto the lumbar vertebra. Now, the issue with a lot of these muscles is that they have really poor leverage to actually exact their action on the spine as they just sort of crawl up the posterior aspect of the spine. Imagine if you've never moved drywall and you're trying to hang on to a big piece of drywall. That's kind of the way that the leverages of the muscles of the spine work. They really don't have an ability to exert force until we're in a flex position. So the erectors, for example, would be a classic case of this. So your iliocostalis, longissimus, and spinalis muscles should not be looked at as extensors, rather anti-flexors, so held in positions of flexion when the spine is actually going to be able to be in a position where we can better utilize that function as an anti-flexor. This is the difference between a muscle's function and a muscle's action. So when it comes to strengthening the low back, in isolation, people use that 45-degree lower back extension, or they're using machines with resistance to go into extension. Likely what you should be doing is maybe enter in, when it comes to low back, muscles or exercises rather of instability through all three planes, and leave the strengthening to the muscles that attach on to this thoracolumbar fascia, or this Christmas tree, right? Which are going to be outlined as the glute max and the latissimus dorsi. So if we think about that Christmas tree outline, we're going to see two major muscles attach onto that are going to give us, when strengthened properly, a great ability to stabilize our lower back, and that's going to be the lats and the glute max. So low back strength in the pursuit of training a muscle from origin to insertion should really be looked at as strengthening the lats and strengthening the glutes. Now, this can be very difficult as both lats and glutes are sort of your acid test of function at the shoulder and the hip. Right, so dysfunctional shoulders, decreased range of motion, decreased stability, decreased ability to get into the overhead plane is going to decrease our strength at our lats and therefore weaken our lower back. Now, with glutes, the same thing. Not training to full range of motion of flexion at the hip, not having an ability to extend the hip for a quote-unquote tight hip flexor. All of these can lead to dysfunction at the hip that can ultimately lead to low back weakness. Now, low back weakness and strength should be looked at as a peripheral endeavor as we improve function around the shoulder and the hip. Low back stability should be our focal point when we look to start training these muscles of the lower back, especially when we talk about the transversospinalis group and the erector group, as they are wired by a different part of our nervous system that makes them more or less inaccessible to voluntary control and conscious contraction. So these muscles are the ones that are often trained, or should be the intention of our training when we train core stability drills, right? This could be outlined by the McGill Big 3 exercises, which we'll talk about in a later video. But just wanted to give some brief context to that statement of why low back strength really doesn't exist, right? Strengthening these muscles deep or superficial to the thoracolumbar fascia is kind of a moot point when we consider the amount of torque and the amount of force that we can create from muscles like the lats, like the glutes, but also recognizing the complexity that comes with training both lats and glutes, as both of those muscle groups are held victim to the function of the shoulder and hip respectively. So it can be a very long rabbit hole to go down when we look to fix shoulder and hip function, but one that when we have the conversation about true low back strength, those are the really the only two muscles that we need to worry about strengthening, training against resistance with the intent of moving from origin to insertion, where the stability of the lumbar spine, which is going to be minimizing base support and deviating a center of mass, and having a conscious inventory in our programming around doing so through all three planes: anti-lateral flexion, anti-flexion extension, and anti-rotation, which is going to be the crux or the starting point of that McGill Big Three exercise, which we'll talk about again in a later video. So just wanted to give some context as to that statement that low back strength really doesn't exist. Low back strength is more of an accumulation of our ability to have functional shoulders, functional hips, buffer and transmit force effectively through the glutes and the lats via that thoracolumbar fascia. And our main pursuit around the lower back should be increasing the stability and resistance or ability to resist force through all three planes.